Hello and welcome to you all. It is Friday, January 6th, 2023, the first edition of Fake News Friday in 2023. And let me just give you a bit of a teaser here. We are off to a ringing start for the new year. If you missed it, last week we had the Fake News Awards, and there were a lot of very strong competitors in 2022, were they not, Harrison?
No, there were, Andrew, and some of the early themes this year are popping up already that we kind of touched on with the Fake News Awards. So we've got a little Pierre Poilievre action in here, some PDS. We've got some CBC returning to their old ways. So I guess the saying is the more they change, the more things stay the same. And it looks like, especially with the CBC, Andrew, that's going to be the way it's going this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, can they return to something they've never abandoned in the first place? That's a question for the audience to decide. I'm Andrew Lawton. That was Harrison Faulkner. Let's get right down to business here. One of the stories that came up again, we had already hit publish on the Fake News Awards, I believe, and this story came up, so we had to kick it into 2023. Pierre Poilievre had a last-minute press conference to respond to, among other things, bail issues in Canada, and specifically that horrific slaying of an OPP officer by allegedly a man who was out on bail and was banned from having firearms, but somehow managed to. And this was something that Pierre Poilievre spoke about. And the media could ask, as they're allowed to, questions on anything and everything. And one of them brought up a question about a blog post written by former Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole condemning those F Trudeau flags I know you've seen. There were a few of them at the convoy. I've seen them every now and then on trucks and cars driving around. And I've said before, I'm not exactly a fan of incivility in politics or elsewhere. And Pierre Poilievre was asked if he agreed with Aaron O'Toole's condemnation or issues with it. And Poilievre gave what I thought was actually quite a measured and intelligent and thoughtful answer.
Well, I don't like the flags, and I don't like rage, but I think we have to ask ourselves, why are people so angry? Like, why are people so angry? And the answer is that they're hurting. You know, it's easy for the political establishment to say, stop all your complaining. But when you're one of the 1.5 million people that went to a food bank in the month of March, it's not so easy. If you're one of the people that went to the Mississauga food bank and asked for help with medical assistance in dying, not because you're sick, but because you can't afford to live, it's not so easy. If you're one of the 38-year-olds living in your parents' basement because it now takes more of a monthly paycheck to own a house than at any time in recorded history, it's not so easy to be happy with the way things are going. If you're one of the people who was overprescribed opioids and is now addicted to drugs as a result, it's not so easy to be happy with the way things are going. I have never seen so much hurt and so much pain and suffering in our population in my nearly 2 decades in politics. So yes, of course, we should tell people to be more civil and to reject offensive signs, flags, and language. But we should also ask ourselves, why are people hurting so badly?
So he says right out of the gate, he doesn't like the flags. But he said that it would be incumbent on politicians to ask, why is that anger there to such a point that people are going to fly those flags and use that term? I don't think that diagnosing where anger in the electorate comes from is a bad thing. I think all politicians should be trying to understand that, even if they don't agree with people. Well, what did the media latch in on this, Harrison?
Well, the media, unsurprisingly, decided to say that, well, Pierre Poilievre's condemnation and of the F Trudeau flags wasn't enough, Andrew. It just wasn't enough to satisfy the media. Of course, who could have guessed that what they really wanted Pierre Poilievre to do was do what countless conservative leaders have done in the past, which is basically turn around and go back to their normal ways of kind of condemning and distancing their own base. Instead, as you pointed out and as we just watched, Poilievre gave a very measured response and said, of course, it's wrong to, have profanity-laden flags and bumper stickers and kind of inject that into politics. But if you're not looking at where that's coming from, then you're not really doing your job as a politician. After all, what are they there for anyway, other than to represent the interests of the people. So classic, this is so classic of City News. They classified this story as local news. Now, there's a crisis of local news happening because a lot of these news outlets are failing to cover local stories, but I would say, Andrew, that an article about Poilievre not going far enough, not criticizing his base far enough, doesn't really fall under local news. In fact, when you only quote a political scientist who is obviously coming from the left side of this discussion, who's obviously coming from a place that is in opposition to Pierre Poilievre, again, that can't be local news. Why do these legacy media journalists always do this? They always say, well, here's a news piece, and all we're going to do is cover one side of the political spectrum, make conservatives look bad, and there you go. That's some local news for you. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's what we call in journalism a single source story, and that it relies on the comments of just one person. In this particular case, the person has no connection to the story whatsoever. It's a political science professor from Mount Royal University, Laurie Williams, who says, quote, Poilievre is basically saying it's the fault of the Prime Minister and a better leader will unite Canadians. But it's not clear to me what Mr. Poilievre is doing is in any way uniting Canadians. It looks to me like it's stoking divisions, unquote. So what Professor Williams is saying is that, well, Pierre Poilievre is not being a unifier. Well, that, again, it actually just completely Kool-Aid mans through the wall of the territory here of just general political commentary that has nothing to do with F Trudeau flags, nothing to do with Poilievre's comments on the F Trudeau flags. It's just the professor saying, yeah, you know what, Pierre Poilievre, I don't know what he's doing to unite Canadians. And well, no, that all he was saying, and you don't even need to like Pierre Poilievre to accept this and understand this, is that, hey, I don't like those things, but if we're seeing there's a problem with them, maybe it's helpful to understand why people are upset. Maybe it's helpful to understand what it is in this country that isn't working right now. And the idea that you can just find one person in Canada that doesn't like something and write a story about that. I mean, we've been doing it all wrong. I mean, we could just say, man on Dundas Street doesn't like what Justin Trudeau just said at that press conference.
Yeah, and headline is Canadians can't stand what Justin Trudeau just said, when it's just one man on Dundas Street.
Yeah, we find two of them, and boom, we've got ourselves a story. Canadians,
overwhelming,
plural.
Booming majority. No, exactly. And this political science professor, just in case anyone was, not exactly sure where this professor was coming from on the political spectrum here, she even says that the question needs to be asked, what is it that represents conservatism? Because, if Pierre Poilievre is not fully denouncing the F Trudeau flags, then maybe that's what represents conservatism. And it's just a bizarre take. Again, you can't classify this as local news. I'm sorry. Local news is like weather, maybe some bad criminal act that happened in a local area. But local news can't be a professor from Alberta commenting on a press conference made in Ottawa from basically just using one political side of the discussion. It's completely ridiculous. No wonder there's a crisis in local journalism and local news because, goodness gracious, this is not local news.
Yeah, and I think that there was a fair bit of, just to take a 30,000-foot view of this, a fair bit of trying to stoke some division between Aaron O'Toole and Pierre Poilievre here. I think a lot of people, now that Aaron O'Toole is no longer the Conservative leader, he becomes the elder statesman that is the benchmark against which all other Conservative leaders should be measured. Same as George Bush was once a war criminal, and then he was that guy, why can't all Republicans be like? Stephen Harper was once the, kitten eater of the Conservatives, and now he's like, well, why can't all Conservatives just be like Stephen Harper? So now Aaron O'Toole is going to be the one that the media goes to for insightful analysis and what should be the Conservative perspective, and I think this was a little bit of a glimpse of that. Let's talk about our old favorite, I don't want to say punching bag on the show, because we punch and kick at the bag, but CBC, which ran the most lazy annual journalism that exists in North America, and it's every single year like clockwork. By 9:43 a.m., Canada's richest CEOs have already earned the average worker's annual salary. This is January 3rd. It's a report that, again, literally comes out every year. Here's the one in 2022. Here's the one in 2021. Here's the one in 2020. I'm not going to go back, but it's the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which does this every year. They calculate down to the minute based on the annual income of the average top-earning CEOs versus the average income of the average workers, and they try to draw this point that there is tremendous wealth inequality and income inequality, which there is, but let's just point out the problem with this report. You are comparing the top 100 paid CEOs, which is an elite group within an elite group within an elite group, against the general population, as though this is representative of anything other than the obvious point, which is that, hey, high-earning CEOs make more than lower-paid entry-level workers. This is not groundbreaking journalism, but the media goes along with it every single year.
It's like you just said, it's super lazy. It takes talking points from the NDP. It's exactly what we've come to expect from the CBC, and we've got many examples later on in the show of just this sort of thing coming from them. But you know that it's lazy because the same arguments get rolled out over and over and over again, and the article always results in the same conclusion. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but too bad, I'm going to anyway. At the end of the article, here it goes, right here. Most notably, it suggests imposing a small wealth tax on the rich. So all of this, Andrew, who could have guessed? The boiled down argument is tax the rich. The rest of it's just fluff about all the top CEOs are making too much money, and we're going to get into the details of the compensation structure. But it takes straight out of the NDP talking points. Jagmeet Singh tweeted this a couple days ago, talking about how he's not for the big grocery CEOs, he's not for big oil, not for the super rich, and all of that. Of course, here it comes, just in time for the CBC annual article. Oh, the top CEOs are making way too much money after 43 minutes of working one day. Oh, it's just ridiculous. Oh, and not to just to add one more point to this, Andrew. The CBC, even though they write the same article every single year, they still manage to get something wrong. They still manage to get something that needed clarification. They put out the story yesterday, and they had to update it to include Monday. So they included the Monday paid holiday, which of course they didn't lead with in the headline because what a way to grab clicks, make a juicy headline like that isn't even really accurate. So there you go, just classic CBC, by the book, playbook sort of thing. And again, lazy journalism, just embarrassing stuff.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to deny that there is significant inequality. In fact, in the pandemic, the executives, the people running these companies got significant bonuses. The stock market did very well, but the real economy for laborers was very difficult, and people did lose their jobs. People did lose income, and I don't want to deny that phenomenon here. But the people that raise this don't actually have solutions beyond tax the rich, because they actually have an issue with capitalism more than they have an issue with the specific numbers that they're bringing up here. But if we want to be about the numbers here and stick to real news, here are some numbers from CBC's Senior Management Compensation Summary. Now, the last one I found was from 2019, and you can see here, total cash compensation, the president and CEOs range between $430,000 and $563,374. The executive vice president's total cash compensation range is $302,000 to $648,000, and the vice president's range there is $274,000 to $603,990. Now, in the case of both the executive VP and the VP, the top end of the range is more than double the bottom end of the range. So this is, I think, a fair bit illuminating about CBC's precision here on their numbers. But this is, again, what CBC executives are making. And the compensation for the average worker, the average private sector worker in 2021 was just under $58,500. So that means that CBC's executives are making more than 10 times what the average private sector worker is making. But they don't include that in their story.
No, and Andrew, and they also don't include things such as inflation taking up a large chunk of people's earnings and making those earnings appear or actually feel a lot smaller than they appear. That would be a good, worthy piece to add to this article. But of course, no, it's just tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. Not so much, hey, here's a solution, or here's what the central bank, here's what the government is doing to cause this problem. None of that, of course. It's just, let's go after the big CEOs. They can take it because they make $14 million on average, and tax the rich. Lazy, embarrassing stuff. Maybe the CBC should be spending more money on their talent and their journalism than their CEOs, who I guess aren't doing very much these days because, like we just see, they're doing the same stuff every year.
Well, we know that the public sector was not very much dealing with what the private sector was dealing with as far as the job-related issues. They are still complaining about being asked to go back to work in person. There was a column by Lynn Ward, who is a career public servant. She's worked for the federal government for over 10 years. She's taking aim at the, quote, one-size-fits-all hybrid work model that the government put in place to demand that employees come back even part-time to the office. And she says for knowledge workers, which is, I guess, what is supposed to describe people in the public sector, take from that what you will, there are a lot more pros than cons to working from home. And she says the pandemic gave us the opportunity to rethink our outdated workplace methods, like having an office. And she says, does it really make sense to go back to our old ways? She likens it to going back to the horse and carriage for a few days a week when you have the opportunity of the automobile. So, just to give one example here, I file in the course of my work a lot of access to information requests, which are requests that you can file to gain access to government documents, which are technically the public's documents. And access to information requests have never been slower than they have when employees have been working from home. And they'll say, well, we need an extension because that division is not yet in the office, so they don't have access to these records and these files. So the idea that it's somehow more efficient to have everyone working from home, just setting aside your arguments about whether that's preferable, it simply isn't true in a government context.
No, and to be fair, this knowledge worker, what's her name again? Lynn Ward, if there was an award for putting everything you could possibly imagine, all these terms, all these words that the far left are using these days to try and bolster their arguments into one article, she would certainly be given that award. I mean, where do you even start? You've got this triple-demic. She talks about the danger of the triple-demic, the flu, RSV, and COVID. I should note, RSV is basically hitting toddlers, right? So these knowledge workers at the public service, they're very afraid of this triple-demic of flu, RSV, and COVID. Pretty embarrassing. Then she goes to climate change, Andrew. So how could you have guessed that actually a return to work is bad for the climate? Because you have to take public transit, you have to take a car to work. Oh my goodness, we're not done there though. Take a look at this. She brings in microaggressions as well. By working from home, she doesn't have to face microaggressions in the office. I've faced less harassment and microaggressions by working remotely. I no longer feel like I'm being judged for the clothes I wear or the way I style my hair. Less focus on my personal physical attributes means more focus on my actual work contributions. And then she writes, we're exhausted. Flexible work arrangements and the ability to work from home has been a savior to reduce daily stressors. Well, I can't imagine how stressful it must be to be a knowledge worker with the public service. What a tough gig they have. But my goodness, the prospect of going back to the office, it's just horrifying, Andrew.
Now, her bio says that she is a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So is she saying that there's like rampant homophobia in the public service that serious point. Because if that's the bigger story, if that's what she's experiencing when she has to work in the office, is significant discrimination and microaggressions from her colleagues. But my point is, like, she's throwing absolutely everything at this just to see what's going to stick. It's like, it's antiquated, it's inconvenient, it's bad for climate change, there's the triple-demic and the microaggressions and, the Lindbergh baby. And it's like she's just throwing anything and everything and being like, surely one of these arguments is going to make its way through. Now, full disclosure, I am in my home right now. I work from home. True North doesn't have an office. I am not against work from home. I love it. But I also think that it's your employer that gets to be the one to make that call. If, Candace Malcolm were to say, hey, everyone's got to come into the office today, and that's the part of the job that we're all doing, and there's a case for why it has to be done, then that is the prerogative of the employer. And I'm all for trying to find flexibility when flexibility works, but I don't think we can say that it's just a 100% superior thing to have everyone working from home. I know of a number of workplaces where the opposite has been the case.
Well, Andrew, also, I'm just going back to the top of this article because I thought to myself, wait a minute, in my prep, I did read that this wasn't full-time back to the office.
No, it's not. It's like
it's a hybrid. It's a couple days. It's a couple days a week. She wrote this entire CBC, what is it? This is an opinion section, so they've gone with the opinion instead of the analysis. I think analysis is reserved for the journalists, right? That's their way of getting around it. But this opinion piece has been written because she has to go back to the office, her and her colleagues. Hold on to your seats here, guys. 2 to 3 days of the week. Hold on, what is it? Yeah, 2 to 3 days a week. So it's not even all the time, but yet because of this, it's going to increase costs for childcare. Grandparents don't want to have to take on the burden of looking after children. Although all of these knowledge workers, all of these public servants, I'm just going to go and call them knowledge workers from now on because it's just too funny. But they all had no problem working from home or working at the office before COVID, but now, of course, the triple-demic, the equity, diversity, and inclusion targets, Andrew, climate change, it just can't be done. It just can't be done. So I guess work from home it is, and maybe there'll be like a mutiny in the public sector. They'll just say, we're not going into the office. This hybrid model's not working for us. Just unbelievable.
See, I think the government made a mistake here because they're saying when they say come back part-time, the implication there is that, well, it's not really that important. We want to just phase you back in. They should have said, you know what, 5 days a week, come back in, if that's the most compelling argument for it. Because now it's like when they're trying to push this idea of flexibility and hybrid, now people are going to say, well, if it doesn't matter to you, then maybe I should just be home oh gosh, anyway. All right, we have to end things there, whether you're working from home, working in an office, or you are sunning in Jamaica like our Prime Minister. Hope you enjoyed this show and have a fantastic weekend. We will see you next week.